They say you find out who really matters when everything falls apart. David Miller learned that lesson the hard way. He had everything: the mansion, the millions, the legacy. A life built on 30 years of blood, sweat, and ruthless ambition. Then the diagnosis came. 6 months, maybe a year. And just like that, the phone stopped ringing. The friends disappeared. The colleagues found excuses. Even his own children, the ones he'd sacrificed everything for, couldn't find the time. One by one, they all left. The millionaire who'd built an empire was dying alone in a house too big to echo with anything but silence. He'd accepted it, made peace with it, decided that if this was how it ended, then fine. He'd face it the way he'd faced everything else. Alone. But there was one man who didn't get the memo. One man who showed up with a toolbox and a memory of a debt David didn't even remember. One man who refused to leave. And what started as simple kindness became something David never expected. A second chance, not at life, at living. This is the story of a man who had everything and nothing, who learned too late what really mattered, and who discovered that sometimes the people who save you aren't the ones you'd expect. Sometimes they're the ones you never even knew were watching. David Miller didn't think about money anymore, not the way he used to. It was just there, like air, like the marble floors that stretched across his foyer, cool under his feet every morning, like the housekeeper who arrived at 7, left at 4, and never asked questions. He'd wake up at 6:30, same time, every day, not because he hadn't had to do anything in years, but because his body remembered what discipline felt like. Back when discipline mattered. Back when missing a meeting meant losing a contract, and losing a contract meant his kids didn't eat. That was 30 years ago. Now his kids ate at restaurants he couldn't pronounce, in cities he'd helped them buy homes in. They called on Sundays. Usually, he'd make coffee in the kitchen that could have fit his first 3 apartments inside it. French press, dark roast. He liked doing it himself. The housekeeper offered every morning, and every morning he'd shake his head. Some things you don't hand off. Some things keep you tethered. The house was quiet. It was always quiet now. His wife, Margaret, had been gone 4 years. Cancer, the kind that comes slow, gives you time to say goodbye, but never enough time to mean it. Her side of the bed still looked made. He slept on his side, just his side. People said the house was too big for one person. He didn't disagree. He just didn't know where else to go. By 8, he'd be in his office. Not because there was work. He'd sold the company a decade ago, walked away with enough money to drown in, but because sitting in that leather chair, looking at the bookshelves Margaret had picked out, felt like purpose. Felt like he was still the man who'd built something. He'd read the news. Check his investments. Not that it mattered. The numbers went up, went down. He had more than he'd ever spend. More than his kids would ever spend. More than made sense. Around 10, his assistant Claire would call. She worked remotely now, had for 2 years, but she still called. Every day, checking in, reminding him about the charity dinner on Thursday, the board meeting next month, the donation requests piling up. He'd say yes to most of them. What else was the money for? She'd ask how he was doing, and he'd say, fine, and she'd pause, just a second, like she wanted to say something else, but she never did. Lunch was usually something light. Salad, soup. The housekeeper left it in the fridge. He'd eat at the kitchen island, looking out at the garden Margaret had spent years perfecting. The roses were still there. Someone came twice a week to keep them alive. He wondered sometimes if she'd want that. If she'd want him paying someone to keep her garden breathing when she couldn't. Afternoons were the hardest. That's when the house felt biggest. When the silence pressed in from all sides. He'd walk sometimes, through the halls, past the guest rooms no one used, past the photos on the walls, him and Margaret at the beach, the kids when they were small, the company's first office back when it was just him and 3 employees in a building that leaked when it rained. He'd stop at those photos, every time. They felt like someone else's life. By evening, he'd pour himself a scotch. 1, maybe 2. He wasn't a drinker, never had been, but it gave the hour a shape, a ritual, something to mark the end of a day that hadn't really asked anything of him. Dinner was quiet. He'd turn on the television sometimes just for the noise. News, old movies, didn't matter. He wasn't really watching. The phone would ring occasionally. A friend from the old days. Someone from the club. They'd talk about golf, about the market, about nothing that meant anything. He'd laugh at the right moments, agree at the right moments, and when the call ended, the silence would come back, heavier than before. He'd think about calling his daughter, Emily. She lived 2 states away, had a husband, 2 kids he barely knew. She was busy. He understood. He'd been busy once, too. He'd think about calling his son, Michael. But Michael was always in meetings, always traveling, always building his own empire. David had taught him that. Taught him to chase, to push, to never stop moving. He couldn't blame the kid for listening. Some nights, lying in bed, he'd think about what it all added up to. The money. The houses his kids owned. The charity galas where people smiled and shook his hand and called him generous. The quiet. He'd built everything he was supposed to build. And somewhere along the way, he'd lost the people who made it matter. But that thought never stayed long. He'd push it down, close his eyes, and tell himself tomorrow would feel different. It never did. The call came on a Tuesday. David was in his office, halfway through an article he wasn't really reading, when his phone buzzed. Private number. He almost didn't answer. These days, most calls were fundraisers, or people selling something he didn't need, but something made him pick up. Mr. Miller? The voice was professional, calm, the kind of calm that comes before bad news. This is Dr. Patel, from Cedar Heights Medical. We received your test results from last month's physical. David's hand tightened around the phone. He remembered that appointment. Claire had scheduled it. Annual checkup. Routine. He'd gone because she'd asked 3 times, and it was easier to go than to keep saying no. There's an irregularity we need to discuss, Dr. Patel continued. I'd prefer to do this in person. Can you come in tomorrow? David's throat went dry. What kind of irregularity? A pause. I really think it's best if we... What kind? Another pause. Longer this time? Your blood work shows markers consistent with a serious condition. We'll need more tests to confirm, but I want you to come in as soon as possible. David sat very still. The office felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer. The air thinner? Tomorrow, Dr. Patel repeated. 10 a.m. Can you make that? Yes. Good. And Mr. Miller, don't search this online. Don't spiral. We don't have all the information yet. But David barely heard him. The call ended. And he was still sitting there, phone in his hand, staring at nothing. Serious condition. The words sat in his chest like stones. He didn't tell anyone. Not Claire when she called that afternoon. Not Emily when she texted about Thanksgiving plans. Not Michael, who wouldn't have answered anyway. He went to the appointment alone. Dr. Patel's office was on the 4th floor. Pale blue walls. Soft lighting. Everything designed to make you feel calm while your life fell apart. The doctor was younger than David expected. Maybe 40, kind eyes. The kind of person who'd practiced delivering bad news until it looked almost gentle. "Thank you for coming in," Dr. Patel said, gesturing to a chair. David sat. "I'm not going to waste your time," the doctor continued, pulling up something on his computer. "Your labs show elevated proteins consistent with amyloidosis. It's a rare condition where abnormal proteins build up in your organs. In your case, we believe it's affecting your heart." David heard the words. He understood them individually, but together they didn't make sense. "What does that mean?" he asked. Dr. Patel turned the screen toward him. Charts, numbers. None of it meant anything. "It means your heart isn't functioning the way it should. The protein deposits are interfering with its ability to pump blood effectively. Without treatment, the prognosis is—" He trailed off. David didn't need him to finish. "How long?" he asked. "That depends. With aggressive treatment, chemotherapy, possibly a stem cell transplant, we can slow the progression. Maybe even stop it, but it's not curable. And the treatment itself is difficult." David looked at his hands. They were steady. He didn't know why. Everything else felt like it was shaking. And without treatment. Dr. Patel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. 6 months. Maybe a year? The room went quiet. David could hear the clock on the wall. The hum of the computer, his own breathing. "I'll need to run more tests," Dr. Patel said gently. "A biopsy, an echocardiogram. We'll need to confirm the diagnosis and determine the extent of the damage before we talk about next steps." David nodded. Not because he agreed. Not because he understood. Just because it seemed like the thing to do. "I'd also recommend telling your family," the doctor added. "You're going to need support through this." He paused, leaned forward slightly. "David, I need you to understand something. That 6-month timeline, that's if you do nothing, if you refuse treatment entirely. But if you commit to the protocol, if we catch this early enough and your body responds—" He hesitated. "We've seen patients live years. Good years. It's not a guarantee, but it's possible." David heard the words, but they felt distant, theoretical. All he could think about was the number. 6 months. Dr. Patel was still talking, something about survival rates and clinical trials, but David had stopped listening. He nodded again. But he already knew he wouldn't tell his family. Not yet. He drove home in silence. The city moved around him. Cars, people, life continuing like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. 6 months. Maybe a year, unless— the word hung there. Unfinished. Unwanted. He thought about Margaret. About how she'd fought for 18 months. About how small she'd gotten by the end. How the chemo had stolen her hair, her strength, her smile. He thought about doing that. About becoming that. About his kids watching him disappear the way he'd watched her. He pulled into his driveway and sat there, the engine off, the house waiting. He didn't want to go inside. Inside, nothing had changed. But he had, and the house would know. When he finally walked through the door, the housekeeper was in the kitchen. "Mr. Miller," she said, smiling, "I made your favorite for dinner." Pot roast? He looked at her. This woman who'd worked for him for 8 years, who knew how he took his coffee, who left his lunch in the fridge, who asked how he was and never pushed when he said, "Fine, thank you," he said. And he walked upstairs. He didn't eat dinner that night. He sat in his office, staring at the photos on the wall. Him and Margaret, young, smiling, building something. He thought about calling Emily, telling her, asking her to come home. But what would he say? "I'm dying. Come say goodbye." He put the phone down. The silence pressed in, familiar, heavy, but different now, because now it had a clock, and a choice he didn't know how to make. David didn't plan to tell anyone, but secrets like that don't stay buried. Not when your body starts betraying you in ways people notice. It started small. He'd be at the country club, mid-conversation with Thomas Berkshire, old friend, older money, and he'd lose his breath. Just for a second. Just enough that Thomas would pause, frown, ask if he was all right. "Fine," David would say, "just need to sit down." Thomas would nod, but his eyes would linger, concerned, careful. The next week, Thomas stopped calling. Then there was the charity gala, black tie. Same event he'd attended for 15 years, same people, same small talk. Except this time, halfway through dinner, his hands started trembling. Not much, just enough that he couldn't hold his wine glass steady. It slipped, shattered against his plate. The table went quiet. Everyone stared. "I'm sorry," David said, reaching for his napkin. But Linda Ashford, seated across from him, was already standing, making excuses. Something about an early morning. Her husband followed. They were gone before dessert. David finished the evening alone at his table. No one sat down to replace them. The rumors started after that. He didn't know who said what first. Didn't matter. These things spread like smoke. "David Miller's sick. Something serious. I heard it's his heart." "No, I heard it's worse than that." Claire called him one morning, her voice tight. "David, people are talking." He was in his office. Same chair, same view, everything the same except him. "Let them talk," he said. "They're saying you're stepping down from the board, that you're selling your shares in the foundation, that you're dying." Silence on the other end. "I didn't say that," Claire said quietly, "but they are." Another pause. "Yes," he closed his eyes. "It's true," he said. "The dying part?" He heard her breath catch. "David, I have maybe a year. Maybe less, there's treatment, but—" He trailed off. He didn't know how to finish that sentence. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked. "Just a little. I'm telling you now." That's not the same. She was right. It wasn't. "Do your kids know?" she asked. "No, David. I'll tell them when I'm ready." But he wasn't ready. He didn't know if he'd ever be ready. Claire stayed quiet for a long time. Then, "What do you need?" "I don't know." "Okay." Her voice was softer now, steadier. "Okay, we'll figure it out." But 2 weeks later she sent an email, professional, polite. She'd found a position closer to her family. She hoped he understood. She'd stay through the end of the month to help transition her responsibilities. He read it 3 times. Then he wrote back, "I understand. Thank you for everything." He didn't blame her. Who wants to watch someone die? Michael called next. David almost didn't answer. They hadn't spoken in 2 months, maybe 3. Dad. Michael's voice was clipped, busy, like always. I heard you're sick. David leaned back in his chair. Of course he'd heard. Everyone had heard. Yeah. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed anything? Silence. That's not fair, Michael said, isn't it? Another silence. Longer this time. Look, Michael said finally, I'm in Tokyo right now. Big deal closing. But I'll fly back next month. We'll talk then. You don't have to. I said I'll be back next month. The call ended. Next month came and went. Michael didn't call again. Emily was different. She showed up unannounced 3 weeks later. Drove 6 hours with the kids in the back seat. She walked through the door with that look, the one Margaret used to get when she knew he was lying about something. You should have told me, Emily said. David was in the living room. He stood when she came in, but she didn't hug him. Just stood there, arms crossed. I didn't want to worry you. That's not your call to make. She was right. He knew she was right. How bad is it, she asked. He told her, all of it, the diagnosis, the prognosis, the treatment he wasn't sure he wanted. She cried, not much. Just enough that he saw her wipe her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. You're doing the treatment, she said. Emily, you're doing it. I don't care how hard it is. You're not giving up. He wanted to tell her it wasn't about giving up. That watching Margaret fight had taught him something about when to hold on and when to let go. But he didn't say that. He just nodded. She stayed for 3 days, cooked meals he barely touched, played with the kids in the garden, tried to pretend everything was normal. But on the 3rd night, he heard her on the phone in the guest room. I can't keep coming back, she was saying. I have a life. The kids have school. Mark's job. A pause. I know he's my father, but I can't put everything on hold for I don't know how long. David walked away before he heard the rest. She left the next morning. I'll visit again soon, she said at the door. He nodded. She didn't visit again. The calls stopped after that. The invitations dried up. The friends who used to check in didn't. David understood. He did. People don't know what to say to someone who's dying. Don't know how to act. It's easier to just not. The house got quieter. The housekeeper still came. Still made meals he barely ate. Still asked how he was. But even she started leaving earlier, staying in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact. One Friday she didn't come at all. She texted instead, I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. I've accepted another position. I hope you understand. He stared at the text for a long time. Then he wrote back, I understand. He was alone now. Truly alone. The house had never felt bigger. The silence had never felt heavier. And somewhere in the back of his mind a question started forming. Not angry, not bitter, just quiet. Is this what I built? A life where no one stays when it gets hard? He didn't have an answer. He just sat there, in the house that was too big, in the silence that was too loud, waiting for something. He didn't know what. The house started showing at first little things, things most people wouldn't notice, but David noticed. Dust on the bookshelves. Margaret had always hated dust. The housekeeper used to wipe them down twice a week. Now, no one did. The garden started wilting, the roses Margaret loved. the one someone used to tend every Tuesday and Friday. David had forgotten to call the gardener, or maybe he'd called and they'd stopped coming. He couldn't remember. It didn't matter. The roses were dying anyway. Mail piled up on the hall table. Bills, catalogs, invitations to events he wouldn't attend. He'd open them eventually. Or he wouldn't. What difference did it make? The refrigerator was almost empty now. He'd been ordering takeout. Sometimes he'd eat it. Most times he'd just leave it on the counter until it went bad. He'd lost weight. He could see it in the mirror, in the way his clothes hung loose, in the hollows under his eyes. He looked sick. He looked like what he was. The phone stopped ringing. Not all at once, just gradually, like people were testing whether he'd notice. He noticed. Weeks would go by. Nothing. No calls, no texts. Just the silence in the house and him. Sometimes he'd pick up his phone, scroll through his contacts. Hundreds of names, people he'd done business with, people he'd donated to, people who'd smiled at him at parties and called him a good man. He'd hover over a name. Think about calling. Think about saying, hey, just checking in. But what was the point? They knew he was sick. They knew where he was. If they wanted to call, they would have. He'd put the phone down. He tried going out once. To the club. Same place he'd gone every Thursday for 20 years. Lunch with the guys. Golf if the weather was good. He walked in and the hostess smiled. Same girl who'd been there for years. "Mr. Miller," she said. "It's been a while." "Yeah, your usual table?" He nodded. She led him through the dining room, past tables full of men in expensive suits, men he knew, men he'd sat with. A few looked up, saw him, looked away. No one waved him over. He sat alone at his usual table, ordered the salmon, didn't taste it. Halfway through the meal, Richard Hayworth walked by, old colleague. They'd served on 3 boards together. "David," Richard said, pausing. "How are you?" There was that question again. "Hanging in there," David said. Richard nodded, uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "Good, that's good." A pause. "Listen, I'd love to catch up, but I'm late for a meeting. We should grab lunch sometime, sure." Richard walked away. They both knew there wouldn't be a lunch. David left before dessert. He didn't go back. The board meetings were worse. He'd founded the Miller Foundation 18 years ago, after he'd sold the company, after he'd made more money than he knew what to do with. Margaret had suggested it. "Do something good with it," she'd said. "Leave something behind." So he had. Education, health care, community programs. Millions of dollars, distributed carefully, thoughtfully. He'd chaired the board since the beginning, until the diagnosis. He still went to meetings, sat in his usual chair, listened to presentations, voted on grants, but something had shifted. People talked around him now, not to him. Ideas that used to be discussed with him directly were decided before he arrived. At the last meeting, Jonathan Pierce, vice chair, someone David had mentored, brought up restructuring the leadership. "David, we're all aware of your situation," Jonathan said carefully, "and we think it might be time to consider a transition plan. For continuity's sake." David looked at him, at the others around the table, people he'd worked with for years. No one met his eyes. "You want me to step down," David said. "We want you to focus on your health," Jonathan replied. Let us handle the day-to-day. It sounded reasonable, compassionate even, but David heard what it really was. We don't want a dying man at the head of the table. Fine, he said. He stood, gathered his papers, walked out. No one called after him. No one called at all. The nights were the hardest. That's when the silence wasn't just around him. It was inside him. He'd lie in bed, his side, always his side, and think about how full this house used to be. Margaret's laugh in the kitchen. The kids running through the halls when they were small. Christmas mornings. Birthday parties. The noise. The life. Now it was just him. And the ticking clock in the hallway. And the empty rooms that stretched out in every direction. He'd think about dying here, alone, in this big, quiet house. Someone would find him eventually. Maybe the mailman. Maybe a neighbor who noticed the newspapers piling up. They'd call Emily. She'd come. She'd cry. She'd arrange the funeral. People would show up, say nice things, talk about his legacy, his generosity. Then they'd go home, and he'd be gone, and it would be like he'd never mattered at all. One morning he walked through the house, really looked at it. The grand staircase, the chandeliers, the original artwork on the walls, the furniture that cost more than most people made in a year. He'd bought all of it, built all of it. For what? To die alone in a museum? He stood in the foyer, the same foyer where he'd stood 1,000 times, coming home from work, greeting guests, kissing Margaret good night. Now it just felt cold, empty, like everything else. He thought about calling Emily, asking her to come back, telling her he was scared, but he didn't. She had her own life, her own family. He wouldn't burden her with his loneliness. He walked back upstairs, back to his office, back to the chair where he spent most of his days now, sitting, waiting. For what, he still didn't know. The house creaked around him. The silence settled in, and David Miller, millionaire, philanthropist, father, realized something he'd been avoiding for months. He wasn't just dying. He was already gone. Everyone had already left. He was just the last one to notice. David stopped checking his phone, not consciously. Not as a decision. It just happened. Days would pass, and he'd realize he hadn't looked at it, hadn't charged it, hadn't cared. What was the point? No one was calling. He stopped shaving every day, too. Let his beard grow in, gray, patchy. Margaret would have hated it. You look distinguished, clean-shaven, she used to say. He didn't feel distinguished anymore. He just felt tired. The doctor's appointments continued. Every 2 weeks. Same hospital. Same pale blue walls. Same questions. How are you feeling? Fine. Any new symptoms? Shortness of breath? Chest pain? Fatigue? No more than usual, Dr. Patel would nod. Make notes. Look at him with those kind, careful eyes. David, we really need to start treatment. The longer we wait, I know, then why I'm thinking about it. But he wasn't. Not really. He'd watched Margaret go through treatment, watched it hollow her out, watched her fight and fight until there was nothing left to fight with. And for what? 18 more months. 18 months of hospitals and needles and hope that kept shrinking until it disappeared completely. He didn't want that. He didn't want to become a project, a problem for his kids to manage, a body that needed managing. He didn't know what he wanted. He started walking. Every morning, just after sunrise, through the neighborhood he'd lived in for 15 years. Houses like his, big, beautiful, expensive. People were starting their days, getting in cars, heading to offices, to meetings, to lives that still had momentum. They'd wave sometimes, polite, distant. "Morning, David." He'd nod back, keep walking. No one stopped to talk. He didn't blame them. What would they say? "Sorry you're dying. Hope it goes well." He walked for an hour most mornings, sometimes two, until his legs ached and his chest felt tight, and he had to sit down on a bench somewhere and catch his breath. An old man on a bench, that's what he'd become. He thought about Margaret a lot, not the Margaret at the end, not the frail, sick version that haunted his nightmares, the real Margaret, the one who'd met him when he had nothing, when he was working 16-hour days trying to build something out of borrowed money and desperation. She'd believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. "You're going to make it," she'd said. "I know you will." And he had. He'd made it. Made millions. Made a name. And somewhere in all that making, he'd forgotten what it was for. He'd thought it was for her. For the kids, for security. But security from what? From this? From dying alone in a house too big to feel like home? He sat in his office one afternoon, looking at a photo on his desk. Him and Margaret, 30 years ago, standing in front of their first house, small, 2 bedrooms, needed work. They'd been happy there, happier than they'd ever been here. He picked up the photo, ran his thumb over the glass. "I'm sorry," he said out loud. The house stayed quiet. He stopped attending events, stopped answering the few emails that still came, stopped pretending he was still part of a world that had clearly moved on without him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was just acceptance. This is what happens when you build a life on transactions, on networking, on being useful. The moment you stop being useful, you disappear. He'd spent 30 years being useful, and now he wasn't. So now he was invisible. One evening he poured himself a scotch, sat in the living room, the one Margaret had decorated, the one they'd hosted parties in, celebrated birthdays in, the one that felt like a stage set now, beautiful, empty, waiting for actors who'd never return. He thought about calling Emily, not to tell her anything, not to ask for anything, just to hear her voice. But he didn't. She had enough to worry about. She didn't need his loneliness added to it. He thought about calling Michael, but Michael had made his choice. He'd chosen distance, chosen his empire over his father. David had taught him that. He couldn't be angry about the lesson landing. He finished his scotch, poured another, sat there as the light faded outside. The house grew dark around him. He didn't turn on the lights. There was a strange kind of peace in it, he realized, in the letting go, in accepting that this was how it would be. No dramatic goodbyes, no tearful reunions, no redemption arc, just a man in a house. Running out of time, he'd built everything he was supposed to build, and he'd die having built it. That was the deal. That's what he'd signed up for. He just hadn't realized how quiet the end would be. How ordinary, how unremarkable. He sat there in the dark, breathing, waiting, not for rescue, not for meaning, just for whatever came next. And for the first time in months, he felt something close to calm. Not happiness, not peace exactly, just acceptance. This is what he'd earned, and he'd face it the way he'd faced everything else, alone, with whatever dignity he had left. The doorbell rang on a Thursday. David almost didn't answer it. He was in his office, same chair, same silence. The doorbell felt like an intrusion, a mistake meant for someone else. But it rang again, persistent. He stood slowly, his legs stiff. He'd been sitting too long. The walk to the front door felt longer than it used to. When he opened it, he didn't recognize the man standing there. 50s, maybe. Worn face, work clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, boots that had seen better days. He was holding a toolbox. "Mr. Miller?" the man said. David nodded. "I'm Marcus Webb. I used to do maintenance work for your company. Back before you sold it." David searched his memory. "Nothing. I'm sorry," David said. "I don't no reason you'd remember me," Marcus said, not unkindly. "I was in facilities, fixed things, kept the lights on. We'd probably crossed paths a few times, but—" He trailed off. David waited. "I heard you were sick," Marcus said. "Heard people were, well, not around much." David's jaw tightened. "Who told you that?" "Doesn't matter. Point is, I came by to see if you needed anything fixed. House this size, there's always something." David stared at him. "You came here to offer to fix things?" "Yeah." "Why?" Marcus shifted his weight, set the toolbox down. "You probably don't remember this either," he said. "But about 12 years ago, my daughter got sick. Leukemia. She was 8. David felt something shift in his chest. "The medical bills were—" Marcus shook his head. "We were drowning. I was working 3 jobs. My wife was falling apart. We were about to lose our house." He looked at David. "You set up a fund through the company, covered everything. The treatment, the bills, everything. You probably signed off on it without thinking twice. Just another request that came across your desk." David didn't remember. But that didn't mean it hadn't happened. There'd been a lot of requests, a lot of signatures. "She's 20 now," Marcus continued. "College sophomore. Healthy. Alive." The silence stretched between them. "I'm sorry," David said quietly. "But I can't pay you for—" "I'm not here for money," Marcus interrupted. "I'm here because you helped me when I needed it. And now you need help. I don't need— Your gutters are full. I can see from here. Your front step is cracked. The paint's peeling on the window frames. And I'm guessing there's more inside." David opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm not asking permission," Marcus said. "I'm just letting you know I'll be around. Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'll start with the gutters." He picked up his toolbox, started walking toward the side of the house. "Wait," David called. Marcus turned. "You don't have to do this, I know. Then why are you?" Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Because someone should." He walked away. David stood in the doorway, watching him disappear around the corner of the house. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to feel. So he just closed the door, went back to his office, and tried to pretend it didn't matter. But Marcus came back on Thursday. David heard him outside, the scrape of a ladder, the clatter of debris hitting the ground. He looked out the window. Marcus was up on the roof, clearing the gutters, working steadily, like it was the most natural thing in the world. David watched for a minute, and went back to his chair, The following Tuesday, Marcus was there
Su
again.
condición es terminal.
This time he was fixing the front step, mixing concrete, smoothing it over the crack. David opened the door. "You're back," he said. Said I would be. Marcus didn't look up, just kept working. David stood there, awkward, out of place in his own doorway. "You want some coffee?" he asked. "Sure." David went inside, made 2 cups, brought them out. Marcus was sitting on the step now, waiting for the concrete to set. David handed him a cup, sat down next to him. They didn't talk, just sat there, drinking coffee, watching the street. It felt strange, but not bad. Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a constant. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, he fixed the window frames, repainted the shutters, replaced a section of rotted fence in the backyard. He didn't ask for updates on David's health, didn't treat him like he was fragile. He just showed up, did the work, sometimes stayed for coffee. One afternoon, David found him in the garden. "What are you doing?" David asked. "Roses need pruning," Marcus said. "And fresh mulch. You don't have to." "I know." Marcus kept working, carefully cutting back the dead growth. His hands sure, practiced. "Your wife plant these?" Marcus asked. David swallowed. "Yeah, she had good taste. These are hardy. They'll come back." David watched him work, watched the roses that had been dying slowly come back to life under Marcus's hands. "Why are you really here?" David asked quietly. Marcus paused, looked up. "I told you no, really. Why?" Marcus set down his pruning shears, sat back on his heels. "When my daughter was sick," he said slowly, "I learned something. People talk a lot about being there, about helping, about thoughts and prayers, but most of them disappear when things get hard, when it's messy, when there's nothing pretty about it." He looked at David. "The people who stayed, the ones who showed up even when it was uncomfortable, those are the ones who mattered. And you were one of them. Even if you didn't know it." "I didn't." "You don't have to say anything," Marcus said. "I'm not here for thanks. I'm here because showing up matters. And right now, you need someone to show up." David's throat tightened. "Everyone else left," he said, quieter than he meant to. "I know. You don't owe me anything. That's not why I'm here." "Then why?" Marcus stood, brushed the dirt off his jeans. "Because this is what people are supposed to do," he said simply. "We help each other. We show up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He picked up his tools. "I'll see you Thursday," he said, and he walked away. David stood there in the garden, surrounded by roses that were starting to bloom again. And for the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. David started looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays. He didn't admit it, not out loud, not even to himself, really. But he'd find himself listening for the sound of Marcus's truck, the slam of the door, the footsteps on the driveway. It meant the house wouldn't be so quiet. It meant someone was there. One Thursday, Marcus was fixing a loose railing on the back porch. David brought out coffee, sat on the step like he'd gotten used to doing. "Can I ask you something?" David said. "Sure. How's your daughter?" "The one who was sick." Marcus smiled, small but real. "Sarah. She's good. Really good. Pre-med at State. Wants to be an oncologist. Because of what she went through?" "Yeah. She says if she can help one kid the way her doctors helped her." He trailed off, shrugged. "She's a better person than I am." David took a sip of coffee. You raised her. Can't be that different, Marcus laughed. Quiet, self-aware. I don't know about that. Her mom did most of the heavy lifting. I was just trying to keep us afloat. Still, working 3 jobs. That's not nothing. It's what you do, Marcus said. When someone you love needs you. The words hung in the air. David thought about Emily, about Michael, about how neither of them had called in weeks. What if they don't need you back? David asked. Quieter now. Marcus looked at him. That what you think? That your kids don't need you? They haven't exactly been around. Maybe they don't know how to be. David shook his head. That's an excuse. Maybe, Marcus said. Or maybe they're scared. Of what? Of losing you. Of saying the wrong thing. Of not being enough. Marcus set down his tools. People handle grief different. Some people run toward it. Some people run away. Doesn't mean they don't care. Feels the same from where I'm sitting. Marcus nodded. Didn't argue. They sat in silence for a while. Then Marcus spoke again. You know what kept me going? He said. When Sarah was sick. What? The people who didn't run. The ones who showed up even when I told them I was fine. Even when I pushed them away. He paused. Your fund, yeah, that saved us financially. But there was this guy at work. Ron, maintenance supervisor. He'd bring dinner once a week. Just drop it off. Never stayed long. Never made a big deal about it. Marcus smiled at the memory. I told him he didn't have to, that we were okay. But he kept coming anyway, every Wednesday. For 8 months. What happened to him? He retired, moved to Florida. We still talk sometimes. Marcus looked at David. Point is, he didn't wait for me to ask. He just showed up, because that's what mattered. David looked down at his coffee. I've never been good at asking for help, he said. Most people aren't. Built my whole life on not needing anyone. How's that working out? David almost laughed. Almost. Not great. Yeah, Marcus said. I figured. The next Tuesday it rained. Heavy. The kind that turns the world gray and keeps most people inside. But Marcus's truck pulled up right on time. David watched from the window. Watched Marcus get out, pull his hood up, grab his toolbox. The doorbell rang. David opened it. It's pouring, David said. Yeah, you don't have to work in this. I'm not here to work, Marcus said. Brought lunch? He held up a bag. Deli sandwiches, chips. David stepped aside, let him in. They sat at the kitchen table. The same table David hadn't eaten at with another person in months. Why do you really come here? David asked. Marcus unwrapped his sandwich. I told you, I know what you told me, but there's more, isn't there? Marcus chewed slowly, thinking. After Sarah got better, he said finally, I promised myself something. I promised that if I ever had the chance to help someone the way I was helped, I wouldn't hesitate. Wouldn't wait for the right time or the right words. I'd just show up. He looked at David. When I heard you were sick, heard everyone was bailing. I knew. This was that chance. You don't even know me. Don't have to. That doesn't make sense. Doesn't have to make sense, Marcus said. It just has to be right. David sat back. You're a better man than most people I know. Marcus shook his head. I'm not better than anyone. I just remember what it felt like to be alone, to feel like the world forgot about you. He met David's eyes. No one should feel like that, especially not at the end. The end. David had been avoiding that word, even in his own head. But Marcus said it like it was just another fact, like the rain outside, like the sandwich on the table. "You're not scared?" David asked. "Of being around someone who's dying? Why would I be scared? Most people are. Most people haven't sat in a hospital room for 8 months watching their kid fight for every breath," Marcus said quietly. "Death doesn't scare me. Dying alone scares me. Dying without someone who gives a damn, that scares me." He took another bite. "So no, I'm not scared of you dying. I'm just here to make sure you don't do it alone." David felt something break in his chest. Not painful, just open, like something that had been locked for a long time finally coming loose. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. Marcus nodded. "You don't have to thank me." "Yeah, I do." They finished lunch in silence. When Marcus left, David stood at the window, watched him drive away through the rain, and thought about what Marcus had said. "I'm just here to make sure you don't do it alone." For 30 years, David had believed strength meant not needing anyone, meant standing alone at the top, independent, self-sufficient. But Marcus had shown him something different. Strength wasn't in standing alone. It was in letting someone stand with you. Even when, especially when, everything was falling apart. David didn't know if he deserved that kind of grace, but Marcus was offering it anyway. And for the first time since the diagnosis, David thought maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face this alone. Maybe he'd already found the one person who wouldn't leave. The one person who understood that showing up was everything. David called Dr. Patel the next morning. "I want to start treatment," he said. There was a pause on the other end. "Surprise, maybe. Relief. That's good, David. That's really good. When can you come in?" "Whenever you need me. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. We'll go over everything. The protocol, the timeline, what to expect." David hung up. He sat there for a moment, his hand still on the phone. He wasn't doing this because he suddenly believed he'd beat it. Wasn't doing it because he was afraid of dying. He was doing it because Marcus had shown him something. That giving up wasn't strength. That letting people help wasn't weakness. That maybe, just maybe, the fight mattered more than the outcome. The treatment started 2 weeks later. Chemotherapy. Twice a week. 4-hour sessions in a chair that reclined too far back, surrounded by other people fighting their own wars. Marcus drove him to the first appointment. "You don't have to do this," David said in the truck. "I know, I can drive myself." "You could, but you're not going to." David didn't argue. The infusion center was on the 3rd floor. Bright, too bright, like they were trying to convince everyone that what happened there wasn't as hard as it was. A nurse named Patricia got him settled. 4 in his arm, warm blanket. Remote for the TV he wouldn't watch. "First time?" she asked. "Yeah, you'll do fine. Just rest. Let the medicine do its work." She left. Marcus pulled up a chair. "You staying?" David asked. "Where else would I be?" They sat in silence for a while. The Ford dripped steady, methodical. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," David said. "The side effects. I know. You don't have to keep coming." Marcus looked at him. "We doing this again?" "The part where you try to push me away." "I'm just saying I'm not going anywhere, David. However bad it gets. However long it takes." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "So stop trying to give me an out. I don't want one. David felt his throat tighten. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. The side effects came fast. Nausea, fatigue, a weakness that settled into his bones and wouldn't leave. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, stomach churning, barely making it to the bathroom in time. Some days he couldn't get out of bed, too tired to move, too nauseous to eat. Marcus came anyway. Sometimes he'd work outside. David would hear him through the window, the sound of a hammer, a saw, life continuing. Other times Marcus would just sit with him, in the living room, in the office, wherever David had ended up that day. They didn't always talk. Marcus would read the newspaper out loud sometimes, just the headlines, the scores, anything to fill the silence. Or he'd bring soup, crackers, things David could keep down. You don't have to babysit me, David said one afternoon, his voice weak. I'm not babysitting. I'm keeping you company. It's the same thing. It's not. David closed his eyes, too tired to argue. When he opened them again, Marcus was still there. Slowly, so slowly, David almost didn't notice. Things started changing. Not his health, not yet, but other things. He started eating breakfast again. Nothing big, toast, eggs, but something. He started showering every day, getting dressed. Small acts of normalcy that felt like victories. He started walking again, not far, just to the end of the driveway and back. But it was movement. It was something. Marcus would walk with him sometimes. You're getting stronger, Marcus said one morning. I'm getting slower. Same thing right now. David smiled. Barely, but it was there. One Thursday, Marcus brought his daughter, Sarah, 20 years old, bright eyes, the kind of energy that filled a room. Dad talks about you all the time, she said, shaking David's hand. Does he? Yeah. Says you're stubborn as hell. David looked at Marcus. Marcus shrugged. I said persistent. She's paraphrasing. Sarah laughed. She helped Marcus paint the guest room that afternoon. David watched from the doorway. Their rhythm was easy. Practice. Father and daughter working together like they'd done it 100 times. You two close? David asked when Sarah went to get more paint. Yeah, Marcus said. Wasn't always. When she was sick, I didn't know how to talk to her. Didn't know what to say. Thought I had to be strong all the time. What changed? She told me she didn't need me to be strong. She needed me to be there. He dipped his brush in the paint, so I learned to just be there. However that looked, David thought about Emily, about Michael. I don't know how to do that, he said. Do what? Just be there. I've spent my whole life doing, building, fixing. I don't know how to just exist with someone. Marcus looked at him. You're doing it right now. That night, David called Emily. She answered on the third ring. Dad? Hey, a pause. Is everything okay? Yeah, I just wanted to hear your voice. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, she said, softer now. Okay. They talked for 20 minutes. About nothing important. About her kids. About the weather. About a new restaurant she'd tried. When they hung up, David felt something he hadn't felt in months. Connection, small, fragile, but there. The treatment continued. Weeks turned into months. Some days were better. Some days were worse, but Marcus was there every Tuesday, every Thursday, And slowly, David stopped waiting for him to leave, stopped waiting for the disappointment, stopped believing that everyone always left in the end, because Marcus hadn't. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. Maybe it meant David wasn't as alone as he thought. Maybe it meant the life he'd built didn't have to end in silence. Maybe it meant there was still time to learn what really mattered. Not the money, not the success, not the empire. Just this, someone showing up, someone staying, someone reminding him that he was still worth showing up for. 3 weeks before Michael called, David tried to reach him first. It was late, past midnight. One of those nights when the treatment left him too restless to sleep, too sick to do anything but think. He picked up his phone, scrolled to Michael's name, hovered over it, then pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times, voicemail. Hey, it's Michael. Leave a message. David opened his mouth. Nothing came out. What would he even say? I'm scared. I need you. Please come home. The beep sounded. He hung up, stared at the phone in his hand. Michael was probably asleep, or in a different time zone, or he'd seen David's name and let it go to voicemail. David set the phone down, told himself it didn't matter, told himself he shouldn't have called in the first place, but it did matter, and he knew it. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 6 months into treatment. David was sitting in the kitchen, forcing down oatmeal, when his phone buzzed. Michael. David stared at the name on the screen. He hadn't heard from his son in almost a year. Not since that call from Tokyo, the one where Michael promised to visit and never did. Not since the middle-of-the-night call David had made that went unanswered. He almost didn't pick up, but something made him answer. Hello? Dad. Michael's voice sounded different, strained. Michael, I heard you're doing treatment. David set down his spoon. Where'd you hear that? Emily told me. She said you called her a few months ago, that you sounded better, Better's relative. A pause. I saw you called. Few weeks back. Middle of the night. David's hand tightened around the phone. You didn't answer, I know. Michael's voice cracked slightly. I was awake, I saw your name, and I couldn't. I'm sorry. David closed his eyes. Why are you calling now? Because I should have called sooner. Because I should have answered. A long pause. I'm sorry, Dad. David had waited a long time to hear those words, longer than he wanted to admit. Why didn't you? David asked. Answer, I mean. Michael was quiet for a moment. Because I didn't know what to say. Because every time I picked up the phone, I'd think about you dying and I'd just freeze. So you said nothing. So I said nothing. David heard something in his son's voice. Shame, maybe. Regret. I'm flying in this weekend, Michael said. If that's okay, why now? Because Emily said you're fighting. And if you're fighting, then I should be there. Should have been there from the start. David felt something complicated twist in his chest. Relief, anger, hope. Okay, he said. Okay, come, we'll talk. Michael arrived on Saturday. David was in the garden when the car pulled up. Marcus was there too, trimming hedges. The car door opened. Michael stepped out. He looked older than David remembered. Thinner, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Dad, Michael said. David stood slowly, his legs still unsteady some days. They stared at each other. 2 men who used to know each other, who'd become strangers somewhere along the way. Michael crossed the lawn, stopped a few feet away. "You look," he trailed off. "Sick?" David offered. "I was going to say stronger than I expected." David almost smiled. "That's the treatment. Makes you look alive right before it kills you." "Dad, I'm kidding." "Mostly." Michael looked at Marcus, extended his hand. "I'm Michael, David's son." Marcus shook it. "Marcus, I work on the house." "He does more than that," David said quietly. Michael's eyes flicked between them, reading something there. "I should give you two some time," Marcus said. He gathered his tools, nodded at David. "See you Thursday." "Thursday," David confirmed. Marcus left. Michael watched him go. "How long has he been coming around?" 6 months. Since everyone else stopped, the words landed heavy. Michael flinched. "Dad, Let's go inside," David said. They sat in the living room, the same room where David had sat alone for months, the same room that had echoed with silence. Now it felt different, occupied. "I don't know where to start," Michael said. "The beginning works." Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head down. "When you told me you were sick, I panicked. I thought if I came home, if I saw you like that, it would make it real. And I couldn't." His voice cracked. "I couldn't handle it being real. So you stayed away. So I stayed away." David watched his son, this man he'd raised, this stranger. "You know what the worst part was?" David said. Michael looked up. "It wasn't the diagnosis. It wasn't the treatment. It was sitting in this house, dying, and wondering if my own kids would notice when I was gone." "Dad, let me finish." David's voice was firm but not cruel. "I spent my whole life building something for you. For Emily, I worked myself half to death so you'd have everything I didn't, so you'd never struggle the way I struggled." He paused. "And when I needed you, you disappeared. Both of you." Michael's face crumpled. I know, and I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I am a coward." "You're not a coward," David said. "You're scared. There's a difference. I should have been here." "Yeah, you should have." They sat in silence. "Is it too late?" Michael asked, his voice small. David thought about it. Really thought about it. 6 months ago he would have said yes. Would have said the damage was done, that some things couldn't be fixed. But Marcus had taught him something, that showing up mattered, even late, even imperfect. "No," David said. "It's not too late." Michael's shoulders sagged. Relief, grief, both at once. "What do I do?" he asked. "You stay," David said simply. "For as long as you can, then you come back. And you keep coming back. I can do that. Can you?" Michael met his father's eyes. "I will. I promise." Emily came the next day. She didn't call first, just showed up, kids in tow. She walked through the door and stopped when she saw Michael sitting at the kitchen table with David. "You called him?" she asked David. "He called me." She looked at Michael. Something complicated passed between them. "You're here," she said. "I'm here. For how long?" "As long as it takes." Emily's jaw tightened, then released. "Good," she said. "Because I can't do this alone anymore." David looked at her. Really looked. She was exhausted, worn thin, carrying weight he hadn't seen before. "You've been doing this alone?" he asked. "Someone had to check in," she said. Her voice sharp, defensive. "Someone had to make sure you were still alive." Michael started. No. She turned to him. You don't get to just show up now and act like we're all fine. I've been calling. I've been worrying. I've been carrying this while you were building your empire. You're right, Michael said. That stopped her. What? You're right. I wasn't here. I should have been. You shouldn't have had to do this alone. Emily stared at him. Then at David. Is this real? She asked. Are we actually doing this? Actually showing up? I am, Michael said. I want to be, David said. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I'm so tired, she whispered. David stood, crossed to her, pulled her into a hug. She broke, sobbed into his shoulder the way she used to when she was small, when the world was too big, and he was the only one who could make it smaller. I thought you were going to die alone, she choked out. I thought I'd failed you. You didn't fail me, David said. I failed you. I taught you that work came first. That success mattered more than showing up. I taught you wrong. Dad, I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. Michael stood, crossed to them, put his arms around both of them. They stood there in the kitchen. 3 people who'd drifted so far apart they'd forgotten what it felt like to be close. 3 people trying to find their way back. They stayed for dinner. Marcus showed up halfway through. He'd left his tape measure and ended up staying too. The kitchen filled with noise, with voices, with Emily's kids running around, with laughter that felt fragile but real. David sat at the head of the table, watching his family, watching Marcus, who'd become something like family. This wasn't the ending he'd imagined. He'd thought he'd die alone, thought everyone had already said goodbye. But here they were, imperfect, late, broken in places. But here, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The treatment ended in April. 8 months. 32 sessions. More needles than David cared to count. Dr. Patel called him in for the final scans. David sat in the waiting room. Marcus beside him. Emily on the other side. Michael pacing near the window. Sit down, Emily told him. I can't. You're making me nervous. Good. I'm nervous. David almost smiled. His family, still broken in places, still figuring out how to be with each other, but trying. That counted for something. David Miller, the nurse called. They all stood. Just me, David said. We're coming, Emily said. Not a question. David looked at them. These people who'd left, who'd come back, who were still here. Okay, he said. They followed him down the hall. Dr. Patel pulled up the scans on his computer. David didn't know what he was looking at. Just shapes, shadows, things that meant life or death, that looked like abstract art. The amyloid deposits have stabilized, Dr. Patel said. Stabilized? Michael asked. What does that mean? It means they're not growing. The treatment worked. The room went very quiet. So Emily's voice caught. He's going to be okay? Dr. Patel turned to face them. The condition is still there. It's not cured, but it's controlled. With monitoring, with lifestyle changes, with continued care, yes, he's going to be okay. Emily put her hand over her mouth. Michael sat down hard in a chair. Marcus just smiled, quiet, knowing. David stared at the scan. How long? He asked. I can't promise years, Dr. Patel said carefully. But with what we're seeing, you've got time, David. Real time. He paused, looked at David directly. Remember what I told you at the beginning?
Su condición es
6
terminal.
months without treatment, but you chose to fight, and your body responded better than we hoped. He gestured at the screen. This isn't a cure, but it's a chance. Maybe years. Maybe more. We'll monitor every 3 months, adjust as needed. But you beat the original timeline, David. By a lot? Time. The word felt foreign, heavy, precious. He'd spent months thinking he was out of time. Now he had it. The question was what to do with it. They went to lunch after the appointment, a small diner. Nothing fancy. Emily's kids colored on the placemats. Michael ordered too much food. Marcus drank coffee and listened to them talk. So what now? Emily asked. What do you mean? David said. I mean, what are you going to do with your
Su
time?
condición es terminal.
David thought about it. 6 months ago, he would have said nothing. Would have said time was something to endure until it ran out. But now, I'm going to live, he said. That's vague, Dad. Good, I'm still figuring it out. Michael leaned back. You should travel, see the world. Do all the things you put off, maybe, or move closer to us, Emily offered, so we can actually see you, so the kids can know their grandfather. David looked at his grandkids, kids he barely knew, kids who barely knew him. I'd like that, he said. Yeah? Yeah, she smiled. Real, warm. It felt like forgiveness. Marcus drove him home that evening. They sat in the driveway for a moment, engine off. Neither of them moving. You saved my life, David said.
Su condición es
The
terminal.
doctors did that, no? I mean before that. When I'd already given up, David looked at him. You showed up. You stayed. You reminded me what mattered. Marcus shook his head. I just did what anyone should do, but no one else did. No, Marcus agreed. They didn't. They sat in silence. What are you going to do now? Marcus asked. Keep living, I guess. Try to be better. Try to show up for the people who showed up for me. That's a good plan. What about you? You going to keep coming around? Marcus smiled. Someone's got to keep this house from falling apart. I can pay you now. Properly. I don't want your money, David. Then what do you want? Marcus thought about it. Just keep fighting, he said. Keep showing up. That's all. David nodded.
Su condición es
I
terminal.
can do that. The house felt different after that. Not bigger. Not smaller. Just lived in. Emily came by every few weeks. Brought the kids. They'd run through the halls David used to walk alone. Filled the silence with noise and life. Michael called every Sunday. Sometimes they'd talk for 5 minutes. Sometimes an hour. It didn't matter. What mattered was the calling. Marcus still came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Not because the house needed the work anymore, but because they'd both gotten used to the routine, the coffee, the company. One afternoon, David was in the garden. The roses Margaret had planted were in full bloom. He knelt down, touched the petals, soft, alive. I figured it out, he said out
Su
loud,
condición es terminal.
talking to her like he used to. I spent my whole life building things, making money, creating security. I thought that's what mattered. I thought that's what you wanted. The wind moved through the roses, but you just wanted me to show up, to be there, to let people in. He sat back on his heels. I'm trying now. I know it's late. I know I should have learned this years ago. But I'm trying. The garden was quiet, peaceful. He stayed there for a while, just sitting, just being. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 years later, David sold the house. It was time. Too big. Too many echoes. Too much past. He bought a smaller place. Closer to Emily. Closer to the grandkids. 2 bedrooms.
Su condición
A
es
small
terminal.
yard. A garden where he could plant his own roses. Marcus helped him move. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked, carrying a box labeled Margaret's Books. "Yeah," David said. "I'm sure." They stood in the empty foyer. The marble floors David used to walk across every morning. "You built a good life here," Marcus said. "I built half a life," David corrected. "I'm building the other half now," Marcus smiled. Better late than never. On his last night in the house, David walked through every room, said goodbye to the memories, the good ones and the hard ones. He stopped in his office, looked at the photos on the wall. Him and Margaret, young, building something. They'd built it, together, and then he'd kept building alone. But not anymore.
Su
He
condición
took
es
the
terminal.
photos down, packed them carefully, turned off the lights, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. 5 years after his diagnosis, David was still here. The doctors had been wrong about the timeline. Not the disease, they'd been right about that, but the speed. The 6-month prognosis was what happened when you gave up, when you faced it alone. David had chosen differently. He'd chosen treatment, chosen to let people in, chosen to fight. And his body had responded, still fighting, still showing up. He had dinner with Emily every week, went to Michael's kids' baseball games, took his grandchildren to the park. Marcus still came by, not to fix things anymore, just to sit, to talk, to be there. They were friends now, real friends, the kind that show up when it matters, the kind that stay. David's health wasn't perfect. Some days were harder than others. The condition was still there, lurking, waiting, but he'd learned something in those months when everyone left. Life isn't measured in years. It's measured in moments, in people who show up, in second chances you almost didn't take, in gardens that bloom again after you thought they were dead. He'd spent 60 years building an empire, and 5 years learning what it meant to be human. The second lesson was harder, but it was the one that mattered. One Sunday, David was sitting on his porch, Marcus beside him, coffee in hand, watching the sun set. "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Regret what? Selling the big house?" "Stepping back, all of it." David
Su
thought
condición
about
es
it.
terminal.
"No," he said. "I regret not doing it sooner." Marcus nodded. "You're different now," he said. "How?" "Lighter. Like you're not carrying as much." David smiled. "I'm not." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn orange, then pink, then purple. "Thank you," David said quietly. "For what?" "For refusing to go when everyone else left. For being the one who stayed." Marcus looked at him. "You would have done the same for me?" "I don't know if I would have." "You would have," Marcus said with certainty. "You just needed someone to show you how." David thought about that, about all the years he'd spent alone at the top, about the man who'd shown up with a toolbox and refused to leave, about the family that
Su
had come
condición es
back,
terminal.
about the life he'd almost lost, and the life he'd found instead. "Yeah," David said. "Maybe I would have." The sun disappeared below the horizon. The street lights came on, and David Miller, millionaire, father, friend, sat on his porch. surrounded by people who loved him, people who stayed, people who taught him that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or square footage or empires built. It was measured in moments like this, quiet, simple, real. It was measured in showing up and being shown up for. That was everything. That was enough. David Miller's story isn't really about dying. It's about what happens when we strip away everything we think defines us. The money, the success, the carefully constructed walls we build to prove we don't need anyone. Because here's the truth most of us spend our whole lives avoiding. We all need someone, not to fix us, not to save us, just to show up, to stay, to remind us we're not alone in this. David spent 30 years building an empire, building security, building a life where he thought he'd never need to depend on anyone again. And when everything fell apart, he learned what most of us never want to face, that the empire doesn't matter if there's no one there to share it with, that success means nothing if you're celebrating alone, that at the end, when everything else is stripped away, the only thing that matters is whether someone cares enough to stay. Marcus didn't stay because he owed David. He stayed because he understood something fundamental about being human. We're not meant to do this alone, not the hard parts, not the scary parts, not the parts where we're vulnerable and broken and don't have all the answers. Those are the moments when showing up matters most. So maybe the question isn't whether you have people around you. Maybe the question is, are you the kind of person who stays when things get hard? Are you the one who shows up when everyone else finds excuses? Are you Marcus, or are you everyone else? Because life has a way of putting us all in positions where someone needs us to stay. Someone needs us to show up. Someone needs us to be the exception, the one who doesn't leave. David got a second chance because one man refused to walk away, but not everyone gets that. Some people die alone, in houses too big, in silence too heavy, not because they deserved it, but because no one showed up. Don't let that be someone you love. Don't let that be you. Show up, stay, be present. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because that's what matters. That's what we'll remember, not the empires we built, not the money we made, not the success we achieved, but the moments we showed up for each other, the moments we refused to leave, the moments we reminded someone they weren't alone. That's legacy. That's love. That's everything. If this story reminded you of something you needed to hear, if it made you think about someone you need to call or someone you need to show up for, then subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because every week we share stories that matter. Stories about what it means to be human, to struggle, to survive, to find grace in the hardest moments. Stories that mend, because we all need reminding sometimes that we're not alone, that someone cares, that showing up is everything.